Hey everybody, if you're a home mechanic, then there's a good chance you'll have one of these. It's a torque wrench, and it's used to tighten bolts on your bike to a prescribed torque or level of tightness so that your bike is safe to ride and at the same time so you don't break any components as well. And if you use one of these tools routinely at home, then definitely stick around because there's a lesser known fact about these click type torque wrenches, which could mean that you're applying the wrong amount of torque despite what it says on the gauge. Now, a little more than a year ago, I put out a video where we went full nerd and I actually showed mathematically that on some types of torque wrenches, it actually matters where you hold the handle. In other words, even if you set the torque wrench to 5 Newton meters, if you don't hold the handle in the right spot, you could actually be applying more or less torque than that when the wrench actually clicks. Now, I know that's a really counterintuitive idea because textbook physics tells us that the torque applied about a point is equal to the moment arm, or the length of the wrench, multiplied by the perpendicular force applied. And so if you want to apply a torque of, say, 5 inch-pounds, you can either apply a 1 pound force at a distance of 5 inches, or you can apply a 5-pound force at a distance of 1 inch. Now, this is the argument that came up in the comments of the last video. It is basically the idea that torque is torque. And if the moment arm is longer, you just have to apply less force to apply the same torque. Now, I don't disagree with that at all. In fact, we just did an example where we applied 5 inch-pounds of torque 2 different ways on the same wrench. Now, the problem with the torque is torque idea is that that only applies to a fixed rigid wrench, something like this. But a click type torque wrench, something like this Park Tools TW5.2, is not a simple rigid lever. And so the idea that, quote, torque is torque, it actually doesn't apply to this type of wrench. Now, breaking this down, there are actually 2 fundamental classifications of torque wrenches. You have length-independent torque wrenches, like your beam-style torque wrenches or your digital torque wrenches. For those types of torque wrenches, it actually does not matter where you hold the handle. Now, for instance, on a digital torque wrench, if you set it to 5 Newton meters, it doesn't matter where you hold the handle. When that wrench beeps, you can be sure that you have actually applied 5 Newton meters of torque. Now, for a length-dependent torque wrench, this is your click-type torque wrench. This is the interesting case because you might set the torque wrench to 5 Newton meters, but if you don't hold the wrench in the right place, when that wrench actually clicks, you might not actually be applying 5 Newton meters of torque. Now, I know that's really hard to wrap your head around. I did my best to show it mathematically in the last video, but in this video, I figured I would just demonstrate the phenomenon using a digital torque meter. Okay, so this is a digital torque meter. It's mostly used to calibrate torque wrenches, but in our case, we're just going to demonstrate the length dependency of click-type torque wrenches. So I've got this length-dependent click-type torque wrench set at 5 Newton meters, and I'm just going to hold it from the middle of the handle where you're supposed to hold it, and we'll see how much torque we record when the wrench clicks. Okay, so right when the wrench clicked, it recorded a peak torque of 4.95 Newton meters. Okay, so I reset the torque meter. I'm just going to choke up on the handle a little bit this time, and I'm still going to apply force until the torque wrench clicks. Again, the torque wrench is still set at 5 Newton meters, and we'll just see how much torque we're actually applying. Okay, so it clicked right about there. And notice how much torque we actually applied that time. Essentially 8 Newton meters, which is over 50% more than we intended to apply. So now let's just try the opposite direction. Instead of holding the torque wrench in the middle of the handle, I'm just going to hold it way out here from the end of the handle. Okay, so 4.5 newtons that time, holding the handle from the very end. Now that's definitely not as extreme as when we were choking up on the handle, but it's still 10% less torque than we intended to apply. Okay, so then just to take this idea to the extreme, I'm going to do something you're never supposed to do, which is to apply an extension to a torque wrench. And this is precisely the reason why. Because we're still set at 5 Newton meters of torque for the torque wrench, but if I turn the wrench until the wrench clicks using a breaker bar, we'll see how much torque we actually apply. And we see that we've only applied 3.9 Newton meters of torque. So that's less than 80% of the torque we actually wanted to apply. And so this is a clear demonstration of the length dependency of these click-type torque wrenches. So hopefully this time I've convinced you definitively that for some types of torque wrenches, it does actually matter where you hold the handle. Now, if you're curious as to why this phenomenon occurs, it has to do with the fact that the pivot point of the clutch is offset from the axis of rotation. In other words, on all click-type torque wrenches, there's the axis of rotation, which is basically right here, And then there's this offset pivot, which is where the clutch mechanism is housed. And that little distance right there is what causes the length dependency in click-type torque wrenches. There are some click-type torque wrenches out there where the pivot point of the clutch is coincident with the axis of rotation. And so again, that particular type of torque wrench is actually a length-independent torque wrench. Again, it really just boils down to this offset between the pivot point of the clutch and the axis of rotation. This Park Tool torque wrench has this type of design, and so does this new feedback torque wrench that I've been using a lot lately. You can see that little distance right there. And even some of my other torque wrenches, like this relatively cheap Titan torque wrench, again, you're gonna see that offset pivot point right there. And even the big boy 200 Newton meter torque wrench that I have here, this has the same fundamental design where you've got the offset pivot point right here with respect to the axis of rotation here. So there you have it. Oh, damn it. Okay, so there you have it, another kind of nerdy, techie one this week. But I figure enough of us are using these torque wrenches on a daily basis. We're trying to do our best to follow manufacturer specification for torque on all our expensive bikes. So it's probably worthwhile to make sure we're using our tools properly and applying the actual amount of torque indicated on the gauge. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. We'll see you next time.